And we are continuing our series through the book of Acts. And last time in the book of Acts, Paul and his team had gone to Philippi and they had shared the gospel there. However, Paul and Silas, they were put into prison for casting out a demon, but God miraculously intervened during the night, causing everyone's chains in that prison to be loosed. And as a result, the keeper of the prison gave his life to the Lord, and his family did as well. And so we continue now in Acts chapter 16, verses 35 through to 40, and it reads as follows. And when it was day, the magistrates sent the officers, saying, "Let those men go." So the keeper of the prison reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us openly, uncondemned Romans, and have thrown us into prison. And now do they put us out secretly? No, indeed. Let them come themselves and get us out." And the officers told these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. Then they came and pleaded with them and brought them out and asked them to depart from the city. So they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia. And when they had seen the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. I want you to notice Paul's assertiveness in this passage. As a Roman citizen, Paul had the right to a fair trial, which he had not received. The Amplified Study Bible notes, Paul was not simply seeking self-justification. He was protecting the infant church at Philippi. By forcing a public statement of their innocence, Paul minimized the possibility that the new believers would be regarded as friends of criminals and troublemakers. Now, in life, there are four basic ways of responding to people. The first of which we could call being timid. This is when you are basically a doormat. You allow people to treat you how they please and don't stand up for your rights. You minimize your own feelings whilst maximizing the feelings and thoughts of others. In other words, the timid person says, "I don't count me, I count you." The second way of responding to people is being a bully. And the bully bulldozes their way through life and walks over people. They try to reach goals in ways that do not respect the needs, self-esteem, feelings, and thoughts of others. In other words, the bully says, "I count me, I don't count you." That's the opposite to the timid person. And then the third basic way of responding to people is a mixture of those two. Such people are timid in that they don't allow, or rather they don't say how they are feeling or what's wrong, but then they are bullish in that they mistreat the offender, possibly with cruel treatment or silent treatment or something similar. But that person who is a mixture of being timid and bullish basically says, "I don't count me, I don't count you." And none of those ways is how we should behave as believers. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." And then in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, it says, "Love does not behave rudely." So being timid, a bully, or a mixture of both is not how we should behave as believers. So how then should we be? The answer is we should be assertive. And being assertive means being able to stand up for your own or other people's rights in a calm and positive way, without being either a bully or timidly accepting wrong. Assertive people stand up for themselves whilst also respecting the thoughts and feelings of others. In other words, the assertive person says, "I count me, I count you." The Mood Juice Being Assertive Self-Help Guide notes that assertive people are able to do the following. They are able to express their own opinions and feelings. They are able to say no without feeling guilty. They set their own priorities. They choose how they will spend their time. They ask for what they want, and they choose not to assert themselves at times when they feel it would be better not to say anything. In Proverbs 28 verse 1, it says, "The righteous are bold as a lion." And we should be bold people, not timid, not bullies, but bold. We should be assertive people. And it's important to realize that we may be assertive in our lives in some areas and not so assertive in others. We may be assertive with some people, but not so assertive with others. But we want to be assertive Christians. And so what I want to look at now are some hindrances to being assertive. And the first hindrance that I want to look at is a lack of self-love. In Matthew 22:39, Jesus quoted that commandment, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." And we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. But notice this command assumes that we do in fact love ourselves. If you do not love yourself, you will not consider your views or feelings important enough to be expressed and shared. And so I want to remind you that you are worthy of love. You are to love yourself. And that's an important foundation for being assertive. The second hindrance I want to mention is a lack of self-confidence. And self-confidence comes from, firstly, accepting who you are. Accepting who you are, that's really important. And then it comes by not comparing yourself with others. It comes from knowing your strengths, and every one of you has strengths. Ask yourself, what are you good at? You have strengths. And then it comes from practice. The more you practice assertiveness, the more confident you will be in doing so. Now, regarding self-acceptance and not comparing yourself with others, in Psalm 139, verse 14, it says, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." So it says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that word wonderfully, you will have heard me point out before, that word wonderfully in the original language could be also translated uniquely. You are uniquely made. And so you shouldn't be negatively comparing yourself with other people. You are you, and God has made you the way he has made you. He's given you your personality, and you need to accept who you are and like who you are and value who you are and let who you are shine. Your glory is in your uniqueness. This is very important. So I want to encourage you to have self-confidence, to believe in yourself. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And it goes on to say, marvelous are your works. And you are one of those works, by the way. Marvelous are your works. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And then the next hindrance to being assertive is wrong beliefs about humility. So, for example, in Matthew 5, verse 38 to 41, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. This passage can easily be misunderstood to mean that we should be passive, timid people. But when Jesus says we should turn the other cheek, this is not to be interpreted with wooden literalness. What Jesus is saying is that when others do us bad, we should turn around and do them good. In other words, the other cheek is the cheek of righteousness. This becomes evident when Jesus goes on to say, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Jesus is here alluding to the practice of Roman soldiers who could force someone to carry their equipment for 1 mile. And Jesus is saying that when they do that to you, that oppressive action, go the extra mile. In other words, overcome their evil with good. As Paul later wrote in Romans 12:20 to 21. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. This is the same thing that Jesus was speaking about when he says turn the other cheek. He's not talking about timidity. He's talking about the other cheek of righteousness, overcoming evil with good. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay, meekness is not weakness, it is strength under perfect control, as it has been said. All right, so don't allow wrong beliefs about humility to rob you of the virtue of being assertive. That is not good. The righteous are bold as a lion. Now, another hindrance to being assertive is lack of love for others. Sometimes being assertive requires us to give feedback to someone that they may not like. The question is, do we love them enough to do so? In Proverbs 27, verses 5 to 6, it says, open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. I've intentionally quoted this from the old King James Version because verse 5 there, I think, is particularly memorable in this rendering. Open rebuke is better than secret love. In other words, love that is in your heart for someone is inferior to openly rebuking that person. In other words, you should be willing to tell somebody when they are in the wrong. That is better than loving them in your heart. And then it says in verse 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend. And wounds obviously implies a measure of pain. The point is that sometimes you have to tell someone the truth and it might not be pleasant, but such truths are faithful. Okay, that's what a true friend will do. But on the other hand, the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Don't be deceived by flattery. You want people in your life who will tell you the truth. Now then, in Ephesians 4 verse 15, it says, but speaking the truth in love. Okay, we are to speak the truth in love. And that's important. We don't want to be people who just speak the truth. We want to speak the truth in love. Find a way of communicating in a loving manner. This is very important. Speak the truth in love. And I'm not here talking about being a hypercritical person. It's not every little thing you need to point out. Okay, so there's wisdom here, but I'm communicating to you the principle of assertiveness. Now, another hindrance, and this is an important one, to being assertive is simply not knowing how to communicate assertively. So I want to be very practical now on this point, because this is here a matter of skill. Sometimes an individual might simply not know how to communicate assertively. So let's consider some tips, and these are found in the resource I mentioned earlier, the Mood Juice Being Assertive Self-Help Guide, and also in an article by the NHS Avon Partnership Occupational Health Service. So let me start with some general tips. Keep what you want to say clear and to the point. Avoid long explanations. Look at the other person. Maintain upright posture and keep a calm tone of voice. Be polite but firm and try to relax rather than becoming angry. Now, those are some general tips, but I want to zoom in on just a few specific tips. And the first one is allow yourself time, or take time. When we are caught off guard, it is easy to respond in the way we usually would, by saying yes or okay, you're right, instantly. If someone asks you to do something or for an opinion and you are not prepared, you are entitled to ask for some time to think. Practice ways of saying this when you get a chance. So if you do get caught out, you know what to do. Try something like, I need to think about this one. I'll get back to you in half an hour. Or, you have caught me off guard. I need a minute to think about that. You are allowed to take time. And so take time when you need it, and make sure, of course, you do get back to the other person. But don't feel you need to have a response immediately. And then another tip is simply to know what you want. Make sure you are clear in your mind what you actually want in a given situation. Otherwise, you won't be able to express it assertively. And this is linked very much to the principle of taking time. You need to process your thoughts and figure out what's going on within you. Now, the next tip is useful. Use I messages. Use I messages. If you are unhappy about someone's behavior, it is best to say how you feel rather than attacking the other person. This means using the word I in what you say. For example, suppose you had cooked a meal several evenings on the run. This is an example given in the stated resource. So imagine you had cooked a meal several evenings on the run for your partner or flatmate, and each time he or she had arrived late and dinner had been spoiled. A suitable I message might be as follows. I got very upset when you arrived late for dinner because I put a lot of energy into making it, and I feel it is a waste if the food is cold or overdone. This approach tells the other person how you feel and paves the way for a helpful discussion of the situation. This is different from a message which attacks the other person. For example, the opposites, if you will, of the I message in this scenario would be as follows. You are always late for dinner. You are selfish and inconsiderate. You can make your own dinner from now on. I want you to notice the differences in approach there. One says how I feel, the other attacks the other person. Another important skill in assertiveness is the scratched record approach or broken record approach. And this can be useful with strangers when you have a specific task. And do remember that wisdom is about knowing when to apply a given tip, okay? Not everything is suitable in every context. So for example, when taking goods back to the shops is the example provided in the mentioned resource. And this approach consists simply of repeating your point several times, no matter how the other person tries to divert you. So for example, the customer might say, hello, I would like to return these trousers because they have got a mark on them. The shopkeeper might say, well, it's only a small mark. It will probably wash off. The customer could then reply, I would still like them changed, please. This is the scratched record. They are repeating what they said the first time. The shopkeeper might reply, we do not have any more of that size in stock. And the customer might then say, I would like a replacement pair, please. Then eventually the shopkeeper might say, okay, we will reorder them and they should be in by the end of the week. Notice that in that approach, all the customer did was repeat themselves, okay? Because the shopkeeper wasn't being particularly helpful or really taking on board what the customer was saying. So those are just some practical tips for being assertive, and you can look more into that should you wish to do so. But I want to share one more hindrance regarding being assertive, and it's this: fear of the consequences. The main reason for unassertive behavior is fear of what might happen if you are assertive. Fear. It might be the fear of looking silly. It might be the fear of rejection, people won't like me. It might be the fear of failure. And I want to, on that point, mention something very important here. being assertive is not primarily about getting what you want. Okay, we're not here talking about being a bully, remember. Often, you may need to meet halfway, and you won't always get what you want. Assertiveness is about controlling your response, not so much about dictating what happens, because there's certain things you cannot control, no matter how assertive you are. But if you don't try, you won't succeed. And the truth is that these fears are often, as the acronym goes, false evidence appearing real. F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. Notice in Proverbs 28 verse 1 what it says in the first clause. The wicked flee when no one pursues. Don't be someone that flees when no one is pursuing. Okay, and sometimes that's what fear is. It's false evidence appearing real. But even if there is a legitimate prospect of a negative outcome, and the matter is worth being assertive about, because please remember, being assertive is also about sometimes not saying anything. We're not saying here that you have to always say something in every given situation. Sometimes it's wise not to. But if the matter is worth being assertive about, and there is a legitimate prospect of a negative outcome, we should not be paralyzed by fear, because God is with us. Consider what it says in Psalm chapter 3 and verse 6. I will not be afraid. Notice that I will not be afraid. And sometimes you need to talk to yourself and say that to yourself. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. In Psalm 23 verse 4, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or as the NIV puts it, the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And you will have heard me say before, the shepherd in those times carried two implements here called the rod and the staff. The rod was used for counting the sheep and for correcting the sheep. The staff or the club was used to destroy enemies. And we need to know in any given situation, listen, in negative, challenging situations, we are either going to learn something, the rod, or God's going to destroy what's coming against us, the staff. Okay, and those two things, they comfort us. So we can see challenges as an opportunity to grow, or to see God's power demonstrated against what is coming against us. And then in Psalm 46 verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. I'm reminding you that God is with you. And then in Psalm 118 verse 6, the Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And then finally in Romans 8:31, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Brothers and sisters, the fact that God is with us should empower us to be assertive people. So let me summarize what we have covered in this message today. First of all, we should neither be timid or bullish, but should instead be assertive people. Hindrances to being assertive include lack of self-love, lack of self-confidence, wrong beliefs about humility, lack of love for others, not knowing how to communicate assertively, and fear of the consequences. Skills that enable us to communicate assertively include taking time, knowing what you want, I messages, the scratched record, and that is what we covered in this message. So let me pray at this time. Bow your heads with me, please.